Members of the SNP are currently voting on who should be their next leader and ultimately the next First Minister. They've taken part in lots of TV debates and membership hustings, but we wanted to give you the chance to put your priorities to them. So we asked for your questions. We've selected a few. The candidates haven't seen them. This is the next First Minister. Your questions.
I'm really enjoying it. You know, the best part of it is travelling around the country, meeting members, just so energised about the possibilities, the opportunities, particularly with independents and how we kickstart that Yes campaign. So, no, it's been really good. It's been intense, I won't lie. I'm pretty shattered. We've still got another 2 weeks to go. And if there's one downside to it, I've really missed the time with the kids. And the wife, I should say that. She'll get me in trouble if I don't.
I can remember the moment I heard Nicola Sturgeon was resigning, and I was sitting in a room with other mums and babies singing nursery rhymes. So I went from that to launching a campaign and having TV debates. So there was zero preparation. And obviously it's an extremely constrained period. I mean, 3 weeks is just phenomenal. And having not been on the front line of politics, sort of getting back up to speed with the issues, ensuring that I was ready to answer questions, has been probably the steepest learning curve of my life.
Well, it's a very short contest, which I have said publicly I didn't think was appropriate for something as important as this. It's very difficult to be able to set out a detailed policy platform, obviously in a matter of a week. And the budget for the campaign is very low. It's not really appropriate for a contest that has such profound significance.
We spoke at your campaign launch in North Queensferry. You said you were the underdog going into this contest. Do you still feel that way?
No, I think there's many people in the SNP who've said to me that I'm the only hope for the party.
In terms of what you can do now in these final couple of weeks, what can you do now to persuade those SNP members to get behind your campaign?
If I know the SNP membership, which I believe I do, and the SNP membership want a candidate that can deliver on independence, I am the independence candidate. If they vote for either of the other two candidates, they're voting for more of the same, they're voting for the status quo, and neither of those two has any credible plan to get Scotland to become an independent country.
Why should the people of Scotland accept a First Minister appointed by the SNP membership only? The SNP demanded a general election was called when a new Prime Minister was appointed by their party membership. Will they insist on a Scottish election to obtain a democratic mandate from the people?
But I think it's probably legitimate to ask for that. I'm not suggesting that we do that because I think we've had so many elections over the last period. I'm not sure the public actually would thank us for bringing them back to the polls again. There is another election coming up quite soon. There's a general election we anticipate that's coming quite soon. And I believe that would be an opportunity for the public to pass judgment on the new First Minister.
Compared with Westminster, it's extremely difficult to take this to an election. There are only two paths to do that, neither of which serve the people of Scotland. One path is to ensure that there is no First Minister for at least a month. No First Minister getting to grips with the cost of living crisis. No First Minister getting to grips with the challenges that are in our NHS. And I don't think that serves the people of Scotland well at all. I think any First Minister should be expected to get to work the first moment after they are elected.
The Holyrood Chamber will get a vote. So all the opposition parties will be able to put forward a candidate for First Minister, as of course the SNP will, and ultimately the Holyrood Chamber will get a vote. And that's not a dead certain thing. I mean, I've said very unequivocally that I'm the only candidate who's willing to maintain and preserve our pro-independence majority with the Greens in that Butte House agreement. Now, I think if another candidate comes in, rips up that agreement, you know, that first hurdle for them will be to get elected as First Minister, and that's clearly important if you want to govern and govern well. So that's the key difference. In Westminster, we don't have the same system.
Are you suggesting then that if one of your leadership rivals, whether it be Kate Forbes or whether it be Ash Regan, win this contest, they might not get the support of MSPs?
Well, they've made it very clear that they would look to unpick the Butte House agreement. Now, remember, that's a Butte House agreement that was endorsed by 95% of the SNP membership. Now, if your first act as the new SNP leader is to reject the only other pro-independence party in the Parliament, I don't think you could rely on them absolutely cast iron to give you those votes. They may well do, I don't know, because I've not spoken to.
What about being relying on
Greens.
SNP votes, though?
Yeah, but that's not enough to carry a majority in the Holyrood Chamber. We're not, unfortunately, a majority at this stage, and you would need a majority to cast to get yourself over the line. Now, I don't know what the Greens would do, because they're not interfering quite rightly in this election contest. But I am the only candidate who's willing to say unequivocally that I would do as the membership has asked us, 95% of the membership, and continue that Butte House agreement partnership with the Greens.
Well, I think it would be outrageously undemocratic if any SNP MSP did not back the new leader, which had been voted for by the party members. We are a democratic organisation. We're accountable to the public, yes, but we're also accountable to the activists, the branch members, the SNP members who worked tirelessly to get us elected in the first place. And their decision should be honoured. And I think there'd be profound questions to answer by SNP MSPs if they did not back the leader that had been chosen by SNP members.
I'm unable to get a mortgage because after 5 years of teaching, I'm still in a temporary job. Every year I'm stressed and anxious about securing a job, and have even looked out with the profession, which breaks my heart because it's my passion as well as the job I always wanted to do. The Scottish Government have said that education is a priority. What are you going to do to tackle this job crisis?
Well, Joanna's situation is almost identical to my own sister's situation. She is a primary teacher and has found herself in the same boat. And it is hugely depressing and worrying to have qualified to be a great teacher and yet not have that permanent contract. And I think it's completely wrong, and it needs to stop. It needs to stop with the Scottish Government working closely with local authorities to ensure that they move away from this ridiculous practice of only offering 12-month contracts. And that requires us, first of all, to ensure that we have the right number of teachers for our classes. You know, we have a commitment when it comes to small class sizes, and yet teachers are not getting permanent contracts. We also need to make sure that we are training the right number of teachers, because if there are teachers coming out of university and the universities have deemed them good enough and suitable enough to be a teacher, then we need to make sure that there are jobs available for them.
First and foremost, we've got to make sure our teachers are paid and well paid and paid fairly. And we know there's been a kind of long, protracted negotiation with our teachers. We know, of course, that EIS have just recently accepted that ballot. I would want to make sure for future pay negotiations we can get those done as quickly as we possibly can, as I've managed to do within health. But secondly, I'm keen to work with local government, who obviously are the employers, in relation to the teaching profession and teachers more generally. We need to make sure that we are giving as many opportunities as possible. That has to be done in a way that is flexible for local government. I think too often I hear from local government that they feel that the national government will come forward with our priorities around education and not work as closely as we possibly can with local government. So I think we've got to make sure we reset some of that relationship. So I'm keen to do that, not just in urban areas, but I think we've got a real challenge around availability of teaching posts in our rural and island communities as well.
Yeah, it's unacceptable, really. We want to attract people into teaching, and we want to retain them in teaching. And my view is that should be on a permanent contract, because, as she rightly says, that allows her to then have that stability and security in her working life, so that she can do things like get a mortgage, buy a property, etc., if that's what she wants to do. And that's, that is what people should be able to do. So the recruitment of teachers is obviously run by local authorities. So the Scottish Government doesn't control that. But on hearing what she's saying, I think that is certainly something that, the Scottish Government should be looking into, to see if there's some other way we can get around this and make sure that teachers are being recruited on a more permanent basis.
Looking at education more widely, it doesn't feel like there's been a lot said in this campaign so far about education, given that the outgoing First Minister said it's our priority, it's her mission to close this attainment gap. Scotland just hasn't done it. What's gone wrong?
Well, we have made some improvements, but you're right to say that we haven't done as much as, we haven't made as much strides forward as we could have. I think that in some settings, teachers are being expected to do a lot more that isn't teaching. So they're being expected to be social workers, they're being expected to be psychologists, etc. So I'm wondering if in some settings it might be appropriate to have other professionals in there to support the teachers, and then the teachers can just focus on the actual teaching.
Two things: we have made progress, but secondly, of course, none of us could have predicted the global pandemic. the impact of that in education. I've got 2 girls myself, as you know. My oldest just was finishing primary school, that really important kind of P7 transition into high school when the pandemic hit, and it had, you know, a significant impact on her education. And that's true for children right across Scotland, so we can't ignore that impact at all. I'm a great believer in giving as much autonomy to the teachers in terms of the funding and as much flexibility. So we know we've been able to do that with the PEF funding, the Pupil Equity funding. So we've managed to use that funding, get it into teachers' hands, and they've been able to use that flexibly within their school. I think the more we can do in trusting our teachers, not just our head teachers, but all of our teachers, with the financial flexibility to do what's right for their school, for their children, for their pupils, then the better.
Can you, as a First Minister, end that attainment gap?
I think we must, and I think we can. I think we do that by both looking at the root causes of poverty and the fact that 1 in 4 children are in poverty, and also getting to grips with education. So my approach to education would be to simplify and empower. Simplify the curriculum, which has been, you know, sort of well reviewed by multiple different sources, all of which have said the curriculum is good, but it's complex. And simplify the requirements on teachers as well, so they can ensure that they can teach. The second part is empowering our teachers and our head teachers to make the decisions that are right for the pupils.
The Deposit Return Scheme in Scotland is due to launch in August of this year, and many businesses, both retailers and producers, have invested many millions of pounds in preparedness, with potentially hundreds of jobs being created. What would be the impact on those jobs and investments if the scheme was delayed? And what sort of picture does it paint of Scotland if we cannot replicate a similar scheme to that which has been successful in other European countries and elsewhere?
So I couldn't agree more. I think we have to keep going with the Deposit Return Scheme. Why would we not? We all know if we walk down our streets or along our beaches, far too often we see those single-use, we see those plastic bottles, we see those glass bottles. They cause litter in amongst our streets, as I say, and amongst our beaches, our parks where our children play. So why would we let the big producers, the Coca-Colas of this world, the Pepsis of this world, why would we let them off the hook when they are involved, quite rightly, as your caller says, quite rightly, who are involved in deposit return schemes in, I think, 44 countries and territories right across the world. So why would we let them off the hook? So I don't think we should delay the scheme. I don't agree with some of my colleagues who described it, I think, as economic carnage. I just don't buy that at all. What I do think we should do is give a grace period for those smaller producers. So your craft breweries, your craft gin makers, they're not the ones that are polluting streets or causing litter in the streets or beaches. It's the big players that are doing that.
So I said right at the beginning, I think probably I was the first candidate to say this, that clearly we hadn't got this right, particularly for the small retailers and producers. There are some outstanding questions that need to be resolved there. I think we should have the scheme. You know, I'm committed to the idea of the circular economy and that recycling. It's very important, but we can't have a scheme that's going to damage the businesses of, you know, small producers, some of these retailers, because I think we all understand that due to the pandemic, many and the energy costs that are obviously skyrocketing right now, many of these businesses are very much consider themselves to be on the edge of sustainability as it is. So what we can't do is pile more onto them if that's going to lead people to be going out of business. We can't have that. So what I'm saying is we should pause the scheme, listen to the voices that are saying, I mean, they're not criticising it, they're saying it can be improved and changed, and improve and change it in a way that it works for everyone. And I think that should only take a few months. So I think it can still be implemented, but it just needs to be changed enough that it can, that it's not putting an undue burden on some of these smaller businesses.
The point of concern that I have is that whilst, yes, it will create jobs, there's a risk to some businesses that they also will lose jobs if the scheme isn't as simple as possible and if there aren't answers for questions that producers have in particular. So small businesses are the backbone of the Scottish economy. Many of them employ people in rural, remote areas, in deprived communities, and it's absolutely imperative that they maintain those well-paid, secure jobs. Many of these small businesses have been through COVID, when hospitality was shut down. They've been through Brexit, when trading relationships have been disrupted, and now they're coming through cost of living. And we know that energy price hikes have affected food and drink producers perhaps more than many other businesses. So they are just about holding on by the skin of their teeth. And a deposit return scheme is good, it's the right approach, but it needs to be simple And these guys need to have answers to some of the outstanding questions that they still have if it is to go live in August.
When the minister in charge of this policy, Lorna Slater, when your concerns were put to her, she made a suggestion that perhaps you need to phone a helpline because she thinks there's a lot of misinformation out there. What do you say in response to Lorna Slater suggesting you need to phone a helpline?
Well, I think if the helpline had answered all the questions, none of the businesses that have been in touch with me would have been in touch.
All of you, as far as I can see, you talk about independence as the number one priority. That's all we seem to talk about. But as First Minister for Scotland, you are acting on behalf of the whole of Scotland. That's all the constituents. Now, the majority of Scotland do not see independence as a high priority. The majority of Scots don't even want independence. You seem to be ignoring education, health, drug deaths, homelessness, poverty. What are you going to do as First Minister of Scotland for the majority of Scots and the majority of these high-profile issues which don't seem to be being taken care of just now?
I think he's absolutely right to talk about the fact that the next First Minister needs to serve all of Scotland. And one of the commitments I've made, in fact, one of the most common points I've made, is the need to reach out to those who don't yet support independence, to show respect to no voters, to understand why they're not yet persuaded, and to work with them to see how we can persuade them of the merits of independence. But I think that good governance isn't just important for everyone in Scotland, it's actually political. To earn people's trust and confidence, you have to govern well. You have to have an education system that's fit for purpose. You have to reform the NHS. You have to deliver for people. As I said already, right now, what are families grappling with? The fact that they can't afford next month's energy bills. These are the issues. And to deliver results and to serve the people of Scotland on those matters will earn their trust and confidence when it comes to the constitutional matters.
The First Minister needs to focus on the priorities of the people of Scotland. So that is things like the NHS, the cost of living crisis, well-paid jobs, infrastructure projects, exactly the kind of things we've talking about already, education. And the First Minister will concentrate on them. And that's what I've said. That's part of my pitch. I've said very clearly that I see that as the role for the First Minister to do that. And that is for everyone in Scotland. Now, I've also said the independence campaign should be away from government. It shouldn't be under the control of the leader. It shouldn't be anything to do with the government. So that will be out in civil society, and that's the Independence Convention, and they will get on with that part. And then the Commission will set up the infrastructure. But I do have to say that I disagree with your questioner there, because I think that many of the issues that we have in Scotland are because we're part of the UK, and we're not able to have the full powers and indeed grow our budget sufficiently in order to address some of these very serious issues.
No, I mean, Graham's right. 50% of our population support independence, around about that, and 50% are yet to be convinced. And therefore, the First Minister, if I'm First Minister, I would want to govern for the whole of Scotland. Whether you voted yes, whether you voted no, whether you vote SNP, whether you don't vote, whether you vote for a different party, responsibility as First Minister is to reach out and not just serve everybody, but make sure we have the priorities of everybody moving forward in our government. For me, if you've looked at my policies over the last 3 weeks, you'll see that we have been talking about, for example, expanding and accelerating the expansion of childcare. That was one of my flagship announcements, looking at talking about housing, talking about renewables, talking about a whole range of policy areas about how we might be able to build on the legacy of Nicola Sturgeon's tenures as First Minister. So hopefully we can give a degree of confidence that, yes, independence, of course, is important to every candidate. I believe that independence is the golden thread that runs throughout every policy area, because I believe being restrained and restricted by Westminster is to our detriment.
How will you tackle drugs deaths? What can you do differently to bring that shockingly high figure down?
It is a shockingly high figure. It's a stain on our collective conscience, and there's more that we have to do. I spoke about the drugs death, I think, in the second week of this campaign, and you can see some of the detail of that. A few things. First of all, absolutely committing to and recommitting that the tackling the drugs death that we have in Scotland is a national mission. That won't change. And the minister that I appoint, if I am First Minister, will report directly to me as First Minister. Again, I think that's really important to give it the priority such an issue deserves. Secondly, for me, the funding. We should, at the very least, not just commit to the funding that the government has already done so, but see where we can go even further in relation to the funding.
It is a shockingly high toll. It's an absolutely outrageous toll, and it shames all of us that those figures are so high. In terms of the approach I would take, I think it starts with those that are on the front line, providing support to those who are in need of that support. I think it can't be a top-down approach. By that I mean it can't be government determining policy that is one size fits all. We need to support the charities, the third sector, the organisations that are working on the front line to provide the right kind of support to every individual. And it will be different kinds of support that individuals need. Some will need rehab, and therefore we need to invest in more rehab beds. Some will need access to healthcare provision, and therefore we need to make sure that there aren't long waiting times.
Yeah, so I read an article by Anne-Marie Ward, I think it was last week or the week before, and it really struck me what she was saying about, so she was talking about the mutual aid model. So I don't know if we are putting enough focus on that model. So that would be things like LEAP. And the idea behind that is it's a formalised sort of peer-to-peer support model based around abstinence. So the idea behind that is that rather than, I think we have a system at the moment, and I'm just going to express it the way it's been expressed to me in the past, where people feel that they've been parked on methadone and that they feel they go to their GP, they want another route, they want to do something different, but the system doesn't seem to be set up to help them to move on down that path, a different pathway. So we need to look at that. We need to look at the investment that we're making into projects like LEAP. And I think we need to change the culture. I think we need to get to a culture where we believe it's completely normal and acceptable that we can get people off substances. And I'm not sure that we have that right now. So we need to move to, so I think it's a culture shift. We need to move to that.
You mentioned Anne-Marie Ward there from the campaign group Favour. She's supporting Douglas Ross's bill about the right to rehab. He's called on all the leadership hopefuls to back him to get off the fence and support his bid to make sure people can get rehab. Would you support his bill?
I haven't actually seen it, so I'd have to look at the detail. But in principle, yes, it sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know if the detail has been set out by Douglas Ross yet, but I would be keen to work across party. I do think it's an issue that unites most of the Parliament. I don't think it was unreasonable for the government to wait to we see the detail of that. I mean, it's really important before we commit to the bill.
But you back the idea of a legal right to rehab?
Yeah, I think the principle behind the bill is sound.
Yeah, I'm not averse to that approach, but a legal right needs to be backed up with provision. It's the provision that matters, followed by a legal right to access that provision. And the provision requires funding. And so, yes, I think people should have the right to access rehab if that is the right kind of support for them. But more than that, we need to have the rehab provision in the first place.
And safe consumption rooms, are you in favour of those?
I absolutely. I think that also needs to be part of the wider package of support. It can't just be one policy to deal with drug deaths. I think it needs to be a patchwork of different kinds of support so that it's person-centred.
My question is, how quickly would you propose bringing a bill on assisted dying if you did intend bringing a bill? And how would you personally support this or not? Would you also propose it being a vote based on conscience, a free vote?
We know that there is a members' bill being proposed by Lee MacArthur. Is it a bill you're supportive of?
Again, I haven't seen the bill. I'm not sure what stage it's at. I think it might be at the consultation stage at the moment. So I am sympathetic to this idea of assisted dying because one of my aunties was diagnosed with terminal cancer and she was quite young. I think she was only in her late 40s. And she lasted much longer than the medical advice was at the time. However, towards the end, it was very clear that she was dying and she was quite distressed. It was very distressing for the family as well. And so I am quite sympathetic to that idea. However, I'm also looking at what's happening in Canada right now. And what's happened there is there's been court case after court case, and the individuals that are now able to use that is a much expanded category. So I think we need to be careful about how we do this. So I'd need to look at the detail, and then, we'd have to make sure we've got appropriate safeguards in place. And yes, I think this is the sort of thing that should be a free vote, a conscience vote.
I think it's so important to say that it's really I think, pivotal, vital that we treat this debate with the respect it deserves. I had an uncle, I've spoken about him before, who passed away after a 2.5-year battle with pancreatic cancer. And it was horrible to watch. I mean, he was a healthy man of 13 stone. And, as per our tradition as Muslims, when he passed away, I was given one of the responsibilities to wash his body, and he was 6 stone at the end of it. And it was really, saw what a painful impact it had, particularly in the latter few months and weeks of his life. So I can completely understand why many people support assisted dying. We have to remember this is about people at its centre. So whatever side of the debate people might be on, really important we treat that debate with the dignity it deserves. In terms of Liam MacArthur's bill, I'm not persuaded by it yet. Part of the reason I'm not persuaded is because of the concerns that have been raised, particularly by groups and third sector groups that represent people who have disabilities and other vulnerabilities, and they have spoken about their concerns that there maybe aren't enough safeguards for that. For example, emotional blackmail that could end up being put on them, and that would only ever be in a minority of cases. I suspect that wouldn't happen in the majority of cases, but they've got a real concern about that.
I've not been persuaded of the arguments for the legislation because I'm particularly exercised by the safeguards that would be in place to ensure that very vulnerable individuals are not in any way subject to coercion. I understand the arguments, absolutely. I understand the absolute need for compassion at end of life, and the fact that people go through excruciating pain. And I think that's an argument too, to invest considerably more in palliative care. But I'm not as yet persuaded.
When you do get a bit of free time, how do you switch off? How do you unwind?
Yeah, I usually like watching box sets and things, on TV. And I haven't watched television since I said I was going into this contest because I just haven't had time. I haven't had any time off at all. So it is a very grueling schedule. I think all the candidates would agree with that. I'm, perfectly normal. I do all the same things that everyone else does. So I love going out for drinks and meals with my friends and family. I like watching good TV. I also sometimes watch quite a lot of crap TV and quite enjoy that as well.
I guess like a lot of us, we'll watch a bit of, crap TV. What's your guilty pleasure?
Yeah, so I was asked this the other day and I said something like Bridgerton, so it's very colourful and but ultimately, probably a bit silly.
Bath time with the kids really is actually quite therapeutic, and we make a terrible mess and my wife doesn't get particularly happy. But genuinely, I know it sounds like a really cliched answer, but my kids mean the world to me, and I just miss them so much when I'm doing the job I'm currently doing, which is health secretary. And I think actually that point is really important. Nicola, and I've got the greatest amount of respect and love and admiration for Nicola. But I think one thing I've learned from watching her is you've got to set your boundaries. So you've got to work absolutely relentlessly as First Minister, but I think it's really important you don't lose the relationships. I wouldn't want to lose the relationships with my kids, my wife. It's really important you set those boundaries, and I'd be really keen to do that as First Minister. I think First Minister, the role of First Minister, particularly if it's Kate or I, who've got young children, I think we've got to, Bute House is going to have to adapt, maybe quite literally, because it will be the first time that it has young kids there. So I love to spend time with the kids. I love a kickabout. I haven't, since the Achilles injury, had too much of a kickabout, but I'd love to get back into fives if I can. Though being First Minister, I think there might be some choppy tackles towards me right enough if I start playing fives again. But I'd love to get back into fives. And the third thing I'd love to do not tell my wife, hopefully she's not listening, but I'd love to buy a motorbike again. I sold mine's a while back, and I miss being back on the bike. So maybe as a treat to myself, I might just buy myself a new bike.
It's all about family. I've got a huge family. I have 3 stepdaughters, a new baby girl, my own siblings, parents-in-law, and we spend a lot of time together. We have dinner together a lot, and that for me is the switch off. So cooking a big meal and having a table full of friends and family, probably engaging in some really good political debate.
When we asked this question to Humza Yousaf, he says he wants to buy a motorbike. He wants to get back on the bike he used to have a long time ago. And I know you've said previously you have ridden a motorbike in the past.
Yeah.
Can we have a literal leadership race here between yourself and Hamza Yusuf?
I'd be well up for that. I got my motorbike licence long before I ever could drive a car. So I used to go down to my Saturday job in my wee 150 little motorbike, and it was great. But happy to take Hamza on a bike.